course, is not whether we can adjust to them, because in the end we can't. If we melt not only the Arctic but the Antarctic, the sea levels go up 70 metres, which means that every port and every sewage farm and most cities in the world will be underwater. It's delusional to think that we can adjust to these sort of impacts. Even 5 metres means part of New York, Florida, Bangkok, Lagos, London, where I come on the north coast of New South Wales, Port Macquarie, about half the town city centre is underwater at 5 metres. So these are impacts that we cannot adjust to. We have simply got to stop and turn the climate system around. This is the only honest approach that we can take. So the question is, what do we have to do to stop these events occurring? And so James Hansen, the American climate scientist I started this talk with, has put down some figures as to what he thinks the targets would be to stop these events, to get the Arctic sea ice back, 300 to 325, to stop the polar ice sheets melting, to stop the Himalayas melting, to avoid ocean acidification, 300 to 350. And of course, we're at 387 now, which leads us to one really simple conclusion. That is, there is already too much up there. This is the most important thing to understand, that we cannot avoid. So when people, Garno, whoever talks about 550, 650, he was on Lateline the other day, said 550, brave target. Well, it's brave if you want to kill the world, because it will. 450 will kill the Barrier Reef. Garno did some modelling on consequences of climate change for Australia, economic consequences. And the cost of the destruction of the Barrier Reef in the Queensland tourist industry was not in the modelling, because he said you couldn't put an accurate enough figure on it. Nor was the loss of environmental amenity, or the fact that Kakadu will salinate with half a metre. So the public debate we have is delusional. It is not dealing with the real impacts and the real solutions. And the real solution is very, very simple. Remember that 387? We have to get back to these figures. There is no other option, because otherwise we're going to be off that blue line, that safe climate zone, to somewhere where we have never been, where we don't know where we can survive, and where most ecosystems and most species certainly will not survive. So the conclusion is very, very simple. From 387, the only reasonable target is 325 parts per million or less. If we don't get back there, this will be not a planet that we recognised. And when James Hansen said we were on the edge of a precipice, he was indeed correct. To get back to 325, we have to stop emitting greenhouse gases as quickly as possible. That's called zero emissions. And then we have to cool the planet, and Matt will talk about some ways that we can do that. The climate system does it naturally over time to some extent, and we can engage in processes to help it. So the science is grim, the conclusions seem radical, but the conclusions are necessary and we can do them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I've heard David speak before. If that's the first time you've heard all that, then it certainly is very daunting. It's even daunting for me to hear it for another time. And I become daunted about what has to be done and the speed with which we have to do it. And I often wonder, where do we start, or what do we do next? And most importantly, can we do it? Well, yes, we can. And that's where our next speaker, Matthew Wright, comes in, because he knows what we have to do. And what is more, his enthusiasm and energy and intellectual brilliance never fail to boost my own energy reserves, which is what I feel I need right now, Matt, so come on and do it for me. But I got a long introduction first. In his usual way, Matt has not provided me with any background information on himself, and I told him I'd have to make something up. But actually what I got here is largely from an online site at ABC, so it's got to be right. Matthew Wright has been campaigning on climate and energy issues since 2002. He founded the volunteer organization Beyond Zero Emissions, or BZE. The core goal of BZE is to facilitate the implementation of the social changes and technologies that will reduce the impacts of climate change and give our society and the world's ecosystems a chance of surviving into the future. BZE differs from the other more mainstream environmental groups by one very important point. BZE believes that we have already allowed climate change to go too far and must act immediately to reduce our levels of greenhouse gas emissions to zero and below. Matthew Wright is producer of Australia's only dedicated radio program on climate change solutions. He works as a climate educator for the offset organization Climate Positive and is currently designing the Cape Patterson Eco Village, a zero-carbon housing development. And in his spare time, he paddles his kayak across Bass Strait to visit his friends in Tasmania. Matthew, we invite you to speak.
Thank you, Tim. Nice intro. I get this up. Okay. Yeah, so like Tim said, I'm from Beyond Zero Emissions, a group that runs a radio program, has a discussion group, creates zero carbon transition plans, does media releases and media work, and has a talks program. And let's talk about Australia's emissions first in a global context. In Australia, our emissions, according to the government in 2006, which is the latest data available, can be broken down into a number of distinct sectors. And what you'll see there is that the stationary energy sector, which is what powers our homes, our lights, our computers, and gas for cooking and things like that, is our major cause of greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see that's our predominant at around half. And then at around 16%, we've got transport emissions, which is for freight and for our cars and planes and diesel trains. We've got fugitive emissions, which is releases from the gas distribution network that were not intended, releases from refineries and like coal mining, where they inadvertently lose a lot of methane to the atmosphere when they mine coal, and that's a big one in New South Wales and Queensland. Then we've got industrial processes, which is work at refineries and other chemical plants and things like that, as a fairly small contributor relative to the others. And the agricultural sector is quite big at 16%, and of that 12% is the way ruminants process food, so sheep and cattle, and they're belching and burping. And then waste is emissions from landfill when your waste decomposes, and that's a relatively small contributor. And then there's this area that the accounting's a bit unclear on, land use change and forestry, and it is open to some conjecture. So there's an idea. So we really need to approach all sectors of the economy if we're looking at climate solutions. You'll see since 1990, when the whole Kyoto Agreement came into being, and 1990 was decided on as a baseline year, it appears that Australia's greenhouse gas emissions dropped through to 2000, and then rose again continually till 2005 when the latest data is available. But actually what occurred was Australia got a special concession where we revoked land clearing permits. And even though land clearing hadn't happened, we were allowed to book that against our accounts, which was called the Australia Clause, especially organised by the previous Liberal government. So often you hear about targets being based on the year 2000. That's because they're running scared. They're worried that governments will come back at us and go, hey, when we do the next round of negotiations, we're taking the Australian Clause out, which will put our emissions about 8% above where they are today. So you can see that really the big emission growth has been in the stationary energy sector. So that's gas, electricity, coal generation to power our homes and our businesses and our industry. Now, in terms of energy, there's a lot of mythology out there about what happens with coal and energy and things like that, and whether we're a coal state. Now, here you'll see there's a big blue line. This represents the growth. This is sort of roughly to scale the gross energy that is contained in the whole coal that's mined in Australia. You see most of it goes out to export, and that's out through that